Okay, my English teacher friends. So, to give you some context for this particular video, the other day in one of the Facebook groups, I asked if teachers knew of an easier, softer way as a launching point into rhetorical analysis, because I find even at the AP language level, with academically motivated students, that when I begin the year with argument, then move to synthesis, then go to rhetorical analysis, which I know is a little unconventional and unorthodox for some folks, but I like to save the most challenging expository mode last so that students are acclimated with my templates and know how to use them for basic argumentation, because rhetorical analysis is nonetheless argumentative in many ways. So I just find that a lot of students fall off the proverbial bus when I unfurl rhetorical analysis. So someone suggested that this was an easy, accessible text. Is Harry Potter Evil by Judy Blume? And I used to read Judy Blume all the time in grade school, elementary school. So I was happy to see this, and it is a very accessible text, which you can find online on your own, and if you have trouble finding it, I'll be happy to send it your way. So in this particular writing workshop, what I'm going to do is demonstrate how to pull the strings of my templates. I'll begin with the introductory paragraph, and we'll talk about the declarative and the inverted thesis. I have a few Bob Ross examples that I made myself to clearly unpack and demystify how to get anchored in the thesis statement. And then we'll move our way to the syllogistic body paragraph. So the template I use for the body paragraphs is called the Syllogistic Method, and I'll unpack that as well when the time comes. So here's the big caveat, and I always say this. So I'm writing a textbook called What If We Taught Composition Like Bob Ross Teaches Painting? And it's the idea that there's a fundamental difference between the assigning of writing and the direct, explicit teaching of it. So imagine if Bob Ross came onto the screen and said, "Hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to put an old rickety New England wood-covered bridge." And then he clapped his hands and said, "All right, class, you got 2 class periods to do it. Here's a graphic organizer." And he talked into the ether about the theory and technique of painting and said, "Have at it, go." Unfortunately, that's what a lot of ELA teachers do, composition teachers do, is they assign. And what Bob Ross does is he gets to that easel and that canvas, and he explicitly details for us how to get through the painting step by step. And even if we are, an absolutely inept painter, we can closely follow along and approximate what he's doing. And with time, if we were to do this over and over and over again, we'd probably become pretty adept painters with some practice. And that's true of our struggling and emerging writers, teachers positioning themselves as the expert writers in the classroom. So as you see me do in this video and all my other videos, provide plenty of models and exemplars, and it will totally demystify the writing process for your students. So the first question is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, you know that since we are performing rhetorical analysis, we're going to declare the thesis. We use the inverted for literary analysis, and then argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research is a 50-50 coin flip. So you can depend, it's contingent upon the prompt and the phrasing of the prompt, whether you declare or invert. So for the purposes of rhetorical analysis, we are going to declare. But here's the kicker. Implicit in every prompt, whether it be literary analysis, so FRQ 1 and 2 for the lit exam, and FRQ 2, which is the rhetorical analysis for the language exam, implicit in all three of those prompts are two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? If students can answer those two questions, very succinctly, very eloquently, articulately, they can crush the thesis point. So let's see how it's done. When we declare the thesis, you begin with the thesis. Just boom, out of the gate, just drop it like it's hot, precise, concise, to the point. Just get to the thesis. But here's the kicker with that. You're answering the question, how does the author or the speaker create meaning? How do they construct meaning? What's their intent? What's their exigence? So the other thing that I like to see in the introduction and throughout the entirety of the paper is a certain level of vocabulary. This is a very academic task. So I like to see tier 2 level vocabulary throughout. And what I mean by that is just a healthy smattering of SAT level caliber words. So again, those that are familiar with my work, you know that I run an intensive word study academy throughout the duration of the academic year. And ideally, so that the student doesn't sound contrived, pretentious, pedantic. I want them to be able to teeter-totter a little bit of colloquial vernacular with the academic. Not too much, because rhetorical analysis tends to be, a relatively nerdy pursuit, I tell my students, right? You really kind of got to geek out on this one. Provide a little bit of context and background without getting plot summative. And then the sentence constructs. Again, those that follow me on YouTube or, have taken my mastermind, my master classes, know that I espouse the idea that there's 12 different ways to construct a sentence. And I got this idea from Strunk and White in their book called Write It Right. And they contend that there's 12 different ways to construct a sentence. So I do nuance academies with my students so that they have some sentence complexity when they write for voice, rhythm, and flow, and I'll model that. And then the introductory paragraph is always going to be 4 sentences long, no matter what, when you use my template. So that's true of all the expository modes. So across the board, exactly 4 sentences. So the inverted is just the flip. And as I said, you use this with literary analysis. And for those that are interested in seeing that at play, just, go dabble through my YouTube channel. There's plenty of stuff for the AP Lit folks and the Gen Ed folks with regards to literature. And I have plenty of material on there for all of the genres. So in my classroom, I have a poster that looks like this. And it's a Velcro poster. So what we do with rhetorical analysis is read a ton of text, small text, and just skill and drill, like everyday new text. And I want my students to begin to see the patterns and the repetitions in rhetorical analysis. The same terms and devices keep appearing over and over and over again. So when we've seen a term or device 3 times in 3 separate pieces, we put it on the poster board. So I'm assuming at probably the time that I do Judy Blume's piece that I'm going to focus on now, all of these terms will be on the board. My students will have seen these a few times in the text that we've read. So let's take a look at a few introductions. Oh, and let me go back for a second. Typically in the introduction, I tell my students when they're answering the questions, what is the authorial intent and how does the author construct meaning? I like to see 3 terms in the introduction that they should focus on, the 3 most salient terms in the passage, and get anchored in those terms and or devices in the thesis. So in this, I want the student to focus on the most important term and or device in the very first sentence, and then sprinkle in the other 2 for sentences. So here it is. Hear the term, hear the device. Through subtle undercurrents of sarcasm, So there it is. Student is suggesting that the tone is the most salient term or device in the piece. Bloom chides recent cultural trends to find nefarious things in children's literature from far right-leaning conservative groups. So in one sweeping movement, student has authorial intent and construction of meaning. But there's more to it than just the tone and the intent. Her anecdotal bemusement questions the logic and rationale of such movements rather tongue-in-cheek. So by saying logic, we're into the logos. Rationale is another buzzword for logos. And then anecdote. Further, her syntactical maneuvers also accentuate a balance between her flip yet frank tone while drawing upon colloquial expressions to deliver her punchlines. As an author who's been there and done it herself, Bloom is asking an important question. When is enough enough? 4 sentences. Let's look at the vocab. Very good vocab, and I poured it on in this one. Subtle, undercurrents, chides, nefarious, anecdotal, bemusement, rationale. Mixed in though with things like tongue-in-cheek, flip, and frank, right? So don't overdo it and try to balance it. I said the word punchline in it. So kids can go a little colloquial, a little vernacular, if they can balance it out with the tier 2. Check out those sentence constructs. Pretty advanced, good voice rhythm flow. I think out of the gate, if a student were to do this, readers would say, wow, this kid's going to crush this essay. So they get the pizzazz, they get the wow, they get the voice, and they definitely get the thesis point. So exactly 4 sentences. What is the authorial intent? How does the author construct meaning? Next one, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Lead with the most salient, sprinkle in 3. Right? 3 terms and/or devices. Fostering a love for reading is a paramount goal in the education of a child. So Bloom is ultimately questioning the logic behind the efforts by some right-wing groups to hinder this process. So by saying logic behind, we're focusing on logos. This student sample is suggesting logos, which is totally fine. It's correct read. Given that she is an acclaimed author who has been targeted by such movements, so we get into her ethos, she anecdotally finds the holes in those espousing the belief that books such as Harry Potter should be banned. So authorial intent. Almost diplomatically, Bloom holds back on our sarcasm. But in doing so, the point is clear. She's annoyed by these petty grievances and just wants kids to fall in love with the act of reading good books without the trifling of overconcerned parent and religious groups. So 4 sentences yet again, tier 2 level vocabulary is there. Don't overdo it though. Stay in the wheelhouse and balance it out with some colloquial, some vernacular. 3 terms, devices are sprinkled in, and they're definitely relevant. It's definitely a correct read of the passage. So, I would do a Socratic seminar, a Harkness discussion, fishbowl. Those familiar with my work know that I do the Plato discussion. That's my favorite. So I'd probably do a Plato's Plato discussion so that students can have a good ascertained interpretation of this particular piece. And especially if I'm doing it early in the academic year, they may struggle with the reading of it and may not find everything that they need to in order to get anchored in a thesis. So here's one more, going to be done the exact same way. Construction of meaning, authorial intent, sprinkle in the 3 terms, devices. 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2. Questioning the logic of the book banning crowd, Bloom playfully deconstructs the argument and looks at it from the lens of an experienced and accomplished author. So lead with logos. Largely anecdotal, right? So we're getting into, every one of these focus on the fact that it's anecdotal. That's very important, the manner in which she wrote it. She delineates why these measures to censor such books as Harry Potter are not only overreactive, but just plain naive and counterintuitive. Even her syntax belies the fact that she's fed up and is not going to hold back any critical punches. One of our nation's primary goals is to create a literate citizenry, and Bloom is drawing into question how this can happen if we allow these outside groups to call the shots in terms of defining what is acceptable and what is not. Every 4 sentences all had a focus on the tier 2, the 12 sentence constructs, and then adhered to the idea that you're going to sprinkle in 3 terms and or devices, right? The most germane ones to the piece, the most salient is what I say. So every single one followed the exact same template format scaffold of the declarative thesis. So my students do that all day long for the purposes of performing rhetorical analysis. So the question then shifts to this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And again, for those that are familiar with my work, you're going to say, holy guy, this guy's not lying. This is so true. You can bust out the syllogistic method. So all this is a heuristic or a template that comes from the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich kids in town would go there to learn about polemics, debate, oration, word wrangling, wordsmithing, and they would often sit around in these circles and throw out these big, juicy, essential questions, kind of like what we do with our students for synthesis or for argument. And the classic text to kind of demonstrate this is Plato's Republic, where they hurl out the question, what is justice? And these great philosophical thinkers step to the proverbial mic and they drop their definition of what is justice. Each definition is kind of housed in a syllogistic package where the philosopher or the student will go premise, premise, conclusion. Aristotle was interested in cogency, and we call it line of reasoning. So how do we get our students to stay really focused and have a nice logical progression in their arguments? And he decided, with this eureka moment, that logic is very mathematical, it's very computative. So a student might say something like this: premise 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. That's a very clear, sustained line of reasoning. That's very cogent. When students write, we want them to be that bulletproof, right? And not get tangential, not get waylaid, not omit premises, not have us guessing to draw their conclusions for them or to add their evidence for them. So in rhetorical analysis, the first premise is going to be an argument containing the terms and or devices. The second premise is going to be the textual support, where they teeter-totter balance the quoting and the paraphrasing. One need not be done more at the expense of the other. And then the conclusion of the paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay. So the conclusion of the body paragraph is where the textual analysis occurs. And I call that the link, the promise, the echo. So in the end of the body paragraph, you got to link it back to the prompt, the thesis, and then shake hands with the first premise. I always say that the first premise is a promise. Go back to that brother and shake his hand and say, hey, I promised you that I would talk about X, Y, and Z. Did I? Is my support and my analysis all connected to that? And if the answer is yes, then they definitely have a clear line of reasoning. So students often ask me this question. Smart students say, Mr. Kuhn, introductions are 4 sentences long because we're using a template. How long are body paragraphs supposed to be? And I like to see them around 10 sentences long. I find that those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers just don't have enough support or analysis to fully substantiate and dig through, parcel through an argument. So 10 sentences is what you shoot for. Do not exceed 12. Otherwise, you're probably going to break the line of reasoning. So here it is. Students ask a lot of good questions. They want us to kind of guide them through this. And over my career, I've heard this a million times. Where do I begin my first body paragraph? And I say it's always a good idea to indicate to your reader that you have an organizational structure, that you have a chronology that you're going to work through, kind of a roadmap. So you'll see my students begin like this oftentimes. Right from the onset, Bloom assumes, right? So start where Bloom starts. And you can do that with any rhetorical analysis passage, any literary analysis passage. Start from the beginning and methodically hammer it out and cross weave when necessary. You can jump around when you're making connections, but otherwise you just go right through it. So the first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long. And again, for those of you that are familiar with my work, you know this is true every expository mode, right? Every essay, first premise is going to be 3 sentences long. In FRQ 1 on the Lang exam, the College Board says, your argument must be central. And I think it needs to be true for all expository writing because it's an active argument, right? So to get students away from plot summative essays where it sounds like a Cliff Note summation, we want that argument to be central. So I have them take 3 sentences and get a few guiding principles in here. So what are a few terms and devices that you can analyze in the second premise? So start where Bloom starts. Right from the onset, Bloom assumes an almost maternal quality as she delves into the narrative of what she presumes was an innocent and pure intention to procure a children's book for her grandson. So we're getting into her ethos. And note, my students are not going to say ethos, pathos, logos. I like it when they imply. Personal and informal. Her initial moves set the stage for her punchlines to be delivered. Her subtle sarcasm is wielded chiefly through her syntactical maneuvers, which enables Bloom to dismantle the rationale behind the book banning craze. So if we put the first premise into the language of a promise, I'm expecting to see some discussion of her how she establishes her ethos. We directly mentioned syntax, so we want to talk about syntax, the sarcastic tone, and then dismantling the rationale behind the book banning craze is the logos. So this is what I mean by multitasking the first premise. If students don't learn how to connect the pieces of the construction of meaning, then they're going to proceed through the piece with one paragraph tone, one paragraph syntax, one paragraph ethos, one paragraph logos. And you just can't write like that. You're not going to, come anywhere near getting the sophistication that you need to do well. I mean, even if it's a non-AP exam, if it's just for a gen ed class, I don't want my students doing that. So the second premise always begins in the fourth sentence. So we talked about ethos first. We should probably get to ethos first. Line of reasoning, just go in order of, the manner in which you dropped them. Immediately, as if the stars became perfectly aligned, she informs us that she couldn't believe her good fortune at happening to be in London the very same day of the book's release. Right? So get quoting, get paraphrasing, and we're going to get into her ethos because that's what we talked first. Good fortune at having to be in London the same day of the book's release. With the purest of hearts, she rushed to the bookstore in the hopes that this simple act would put her up there with the best grandmas in the world. Right? So I like it when students do not quote dump. Use the language of the text for your diction analysis. And I have a simple rule to get students to embed their quotes so that they're silky smooth and sound conversational. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of a quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. All right, so we're quoting, we're dissecting the ethos. Let's get going. Never assuming for a single second that her actions are impure, Bloom sarcastically asks, It's a good thing when children enjoy books, isn't it? All right, so we're talking about sarcasm and we're also talking about syntax. This is the perfect quote for this because you have the rhetorical question in there, which is going to get me into a discussion of the syntactical maneuvers, right? So you go right in order, right? Keep the promise of the first premise. So you quoted, let's analyze it. This rhetorical question is at the crux of the debate. Igniting the spark that enables kids to be lifelong learners is one of the core reasons why Bloom dedicated her working life to writing children's literature. But to examine the logic behind the push to ban such books, Bloom must first flip the script. Simply put, the thinking works like this. If children are excited about a book, it must be suspect. All right, let's go back here. Do you see how lastly here after syntax in the first premise, we're talking about logos. Now, here we are talking about logos. Very cool, right? Because this is kind of the conclusion of her syllogism. If children are excited about a book, it must be suspect. So my students are really well versed on syllogisms, obviously, right? Since that's what they're using to write their body paragraphs. So, quote, analyze. Historically, this line of thinking has proven true in that in Bloom's books, it's reality that's seen as corrupting, while in Harry Potter, the perceived danger is fantasy. All right, we're good. We're tearing apart the logos. The dichotomy is clear. Evil can be found lurking everywhere these days, no matter the genre or intent. The use of such parentheticals heightens the sarcasm. Further, when Bloom asks, gee, where does that leave the kids? The answer is clear. The kids are fine. All right, we have plenty of support and analysis in here, right? Plenty, plenty, plenty. So, did we talk about ethos? Yep. Did we talk about sarcasm? Yep. Did we talk about syntax? Yep. And did we talk about logos? Yep. Did anything else get brought into the picture? No. So therefore, we've kept our line of reasoning, but we just can't abandon the paragraph yet. We got to link it all back to the prompt, the thesis, and shake hands with that first premise. And this just takes a couple of sentences. Sometimes a book is just a book, nothing more, nothing less. But if one is hell bent on finding what they are looking for, they are sure to find sinister things in the most innocent of intentions. Right? So you just kind of echo that thesis. And that all takes about 10 to 12 sentences. So pretty cool how that works. So that line of reasoning was really well established and stayed well intact from start to finish. Very, very cool, very deliberate. So, we have another question. What do I do next? You bust out another syllogism. There's still a whole bunch more to analyze in this. So, take 3 sentences to set up the focus. Multitask, right? Go get the rest of what needs to be analyzed. And for AP Lang, I tell my students that I want their essays to be 4 paragraphs long, intro, 2 bodies, conclusion paragraph. And that's plenty. So all FRQs that my students write are going to be 4 sentences long. To further her dissection of all the apparent flaws in the opposition's thinking, so we're still going to tear apart some logos, Bloom weaves a number of colloquial expressions into her narrative to provide a bit of extra pep to her sarcasm. Again, you're just dropping terms. So we are going to analyze her anecdotal narrative a little more. We're going to get into her diction and still focus on the sarcasm because the sarcasm's huge. Citing examples spanning decades, so that's part of the ethos. She also enumerates, new term that we haven't looked at yet, the countless instances these witch hunts have occurred, including her own experiences. So we're going to probe the ethos a little bit more because this happened to Bloom, an author, going 40 years now. And yet again, as her argument advances, it's her syntactical manipulations that throw the real zingers into her assessment of the debate. So let's talk about this. We were mentioning it in the introduction. Still keep the vocab up, and let's rock and roll some complex sentences. So if we go back here, look at this sentence here that we're follow my arrow. Uh, Historically, this line of thinking has proven true in that in Bloom's book, it's reality that's seen as corrupting, while in Harry Potter, the perceived danger is fantasy. Right? Good, good, good. Look at the next one. The dichotomy is clear. Got to be using stuff like this. Evil can be found lurking everywhere these days, no matter the genre or intent. Right? So, good flow, good rhythm. I was talking to some folks that were grading the AP Lang exam, just couple of weeks ago, and a number of readers said, I could go 100 essays and not see um, a dash, not see a semicolon, not see a colon. Kids just go comma heavy and use a lot of comma splices. So that goes back to my Nuance Academy. My students, for the most part, the ones that give me an iota of effort have that stuff down. So, all right. We've unpacked the promise. We know where this is going. Now you got to go in order. So of in order of the way things were dropped here. So second premise begins fourth sentence, and just have at it. Get quoting, get paraphrasing. In order to create a shared alliance with her audience, Bloom spruces up her logical appeal with plenty of vernacular expressions such as gee, but hey, and even brouhaha. Why am I talking about the vernacular? Because I said colloquial here. You go in order, all right? Just go right in order. So quote exactly what you need. So this helps students quote with deliberation when they're using templates. To really hammer home her point, however, she occasionally poses a rhetorical question to drop the proverbial fist on her reasoning. So now, by saying this rhetorical question, we got the syntax, and the proverbial fist on her reasoning is logos. Going right in order again. Do this every single time. At the current rate, she suggests that she will not be surprised to one day read the following headline from one of the most innocuous books on the market: Goodnight Moon banned for encouraging children to communicate with furniture. All right, we got to analyze that now. We quoted, analyze it. We're in logos. Logically, this is ludicrous, but one must remember that there is a faction of parents and religious groups who are demanding immediate removal of any book for any reason from school or classroom libraries. Continuing on to the next slide. This is the reality of the situation, so one must ask. And we all know where that can lead, don't we? Conceding power to radical ideologues is dangerous, especially in her home country of America. It is preposterous to assume that kids will begin to utter crazy talk to furniture or inherit the terrible isms that are alluded to in her critique of past precedent. All sorts of subversive tales have been read for generations, and can turn out fine. One thing has been made clear about the reading of these books: that we love to read. All right, so plenty of support and analysis. Let's go back. Do we have support and analysis for every term and device that is dropped in the first premise in the argument? We do. It's all there. There's plenty of syntax. We got the diction analysis of the colloquial and the vernacular. We hit upon the sarcasm, and we definitely tore apart the logos. It's all there, all right, in that second premise. In the conclusion, let's wrap it all up. The exclamatory sentence is important because it highlights the fact that these books are just that: books that kids love to devour. A love of reading is what is being cultivated here, not sinister cults or demonic youth with curdled morals, right? So the writer of this essay, has good sentence or syntactical manipulation in terms of being able to wield a variety of complex and simple sentence constructs, vocab up, but not overcooked, not overbaked. There is some colloquial and some vernacular in here as well. It's always going to be 10 to 12 sentences. Keep the promise of the first premise. So students do that all day long for me. And the big thing is this guy right here. You got to Bob Ross your instruction. You're the expert in the classroom, right with your students. So to wrap things up here, know that I'm offering a fantastic professional development opportunity with the National Writing Project. For those of you needing some PD hours, my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind is being offered through the National Writing Project. I'm still the lead teacher. I'm still running the show. You get 10 hours of PD for a 5-hour course. So we're going to meet Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and for 1 hour, and then you'll probably have a half hour of outside work per week for a total of 10 hours. And if you want more information on that, you can go to NWP's website, which is www.nwp.org. I have a ton of stuff on my webpage as well, www.teachingwritingcoach.com, and it's a greatly reduced course through NWP. Just they got more bandwidth and funding than I do as a solo act. So a very affordable course if you're looking for some good PD. And lastly, I'll be doing some webinars once the academic year kicks off with Perfection Learning. And I will be at NCTE with Brandon Abden and Tim Freitas this fall in November in California, presenting with those two fine gentlemen. So plenty of irons in the fire. So reach out if you need anything. If you want these slides for your own classroom use so that you can host your own writing workshop, email me at teachinghowtowrite.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And for now, be well, happy teaching, happy writing.